The great hall of the Galactic Council buzzed with voices from across the stars. Hundreds of different species filled the massive chamber, their forms as varied as the worlds they came from. Some walked on two legs like humans, others slithered or floated through the air. All of them had one thing in common. They believed they were the most important beings in the galaxy. Ambassador Kyung-ho sat quietly in the human section, watching the chaos unfold before him. The Vraxians were arguing again, their deep voices booming across the hall like thunder. These giant warriors stood nearly 3 meters tall, their blue-gray skin covered in ceremonial armor that clinked with every gesture. Their leader, General Thexmore, pounded his fist on the speaking platform. "The outer colonies need strong protection," Thexmore roared. "Only Vraxian ships can keep the trade routes safe." The snake-like Kasari hissed their disagreement. Their representative, Senator Vithek, raised his scaled head high. His yellow eyes glowed with contempt as he spoke in his cold, precise voice. "Vraxian brutes know only how to break things," Vithek said. "Kasari technology is far superior. Our automated systems can protect the colonies without risking lives." Kyung-ho had heard this same argument 1,000 times before. The big species always fought over who was stronger, who was smarter, who deserved to rule. They never seemed to notice the smaller problems that kept growing while they argued. He stood up slowly, waiting for his turn to speak. The chamber didn't quiet down much when humans talked. Most species saw them as weak and unimportant. Humans had no great armies like the Vraxians. They had no advanced technology like the Kasari. They were just ordinary. "The outer colonies need food shipments," Kyung-ho said in his calm voice. 3 worlds are facing crop failures. The Catherian refugees still need homes after their planet was destroyed. The shipping lanes have more pirates because we keep arguing instead of working together. General Thexmore laughed, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Humans always worry about small things. Feed a few refugees, chase away some pirates. These are not real problems. Real problems need real solutions. Vraxian solutions." Senator Vithek's forked tongue flicked out in amusement. "Humans cannot understand the bigger picture. They waste time on creatures that do not matter. Let the weak species fade away. Only the strong should survive." Kyung-ho felt a familiar tiredness settle in his chest. He had been trying to bridge these gaps for 20 years. Every time there was a crisis, humans stepped in to help. When species couldn't agree, humans found ways to make peace. When disasters struck, humans organized relief efforts. When refugees needed homes, humans opened their doors. But nobody ever noticed. The big species took credit for successes and blamed others for failures. The smaller species were grateful, but they had no voice in the council. Dr. So-Young Park, Earth's chief scientist, touched Kyung-ho's arm. Her dark eyes were sad, but determined. She had been working on this decision for months, running calculations and talking to human colonies across the galaxy. "It's time," she whispered. Kyung-ho nodded. He had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but hope wasn't enough anymore. He stood again and requested permission to make a formal announcement. The chamber didn't quiet down completely, but enough voices stopped to let him speak. "The human colonies have made a decision," Kyung-ho said. His voice carried clearly through the hall. "We are withdrawing from the Galactic Alliance." This time, the chamber did go quiet. Not because they cared about humans leaving, but because they were surprised. Species didn't usually leave the Alliance, they were usually kicked out or conquered. "We have tried to help build something better here," Kyung-ho continued. "We have offered our services, our knowledge, our friendship. But we see now that our vision of cooperation is not wanted. We choose to follow our own path." General Thexmore stood up, his armor clanking. "Good. Let the weak humans run away. We never needed them anyway." Senator Vithek hissed agreement. "Perhaps now the Council can focus on important matters instead of wasting time on humanitarian nonsense." But not everyone agreed. Councillor Lumthera of the ethereal race floated forward, her translucent form shimmering with concern. The ethereals were strange beings made of energy and mathematics, and they saw patterns that others missed. "This is a mistake," Lumthera said in her musical voice. "Humans serve a function that others do not see. Their departure will create instabilities in the system. Her warning was ignored. The Vraxians and Kasari were already planning how to divide human territories and resources between themselves. Over the next 6 months, humanity began its quiet exodus. There were no angry speeches, no threats, no dramatic gestures. Human ships simply started leaving. Captain Jinwoo Lee loaded the last supplies onto his transport vessel. Around him, the busy spaceport of Haven Station continued its normal operations, but something felt different. Human voices were becoming fewer. Human. Ships were departing more often than they arrived. "You sure about this?" asked Kex, his Mendi co-pilot. The small, furry alien had worked with humans for years and respected their calm competence. Jinwoo nodded as he watched another human convoy prepare for departure. "We've done what we can here. Time to try something new." What surprised many observers was who left with the humans. The Catherian refugees, still grieving their dead world, chose to follow the humans who had sheltered them. Several Mendi trading families joined human convoys, trusting their longtime partners more than the uncertain future under Vraxian or Kasari rule. Even some members of other species, scientists, artists, engineers, teachers, quietly joined the human exodus. They had worked closely with humans and shared their values of cooperation and peaceful progress. Dr. So Young Park stood on the observation deck of the last human government ship to leave the inner worlds. Behind them, the lights of the Galactic Council grew smaller. Ahead lay unknown space and uncertain futures. "Any regrets?" asked her assistant, Dr. Taehyun Park. So Young shook her head. "We tried to build something together with them. They wanted to build things on top of each other instead. Maybe out there we can find others who want to build together." Back in the council chambers, General Thexmore was already making plans to expand Vraxian influence into former human territories. Senator Vithiak discussed installing Kasari governors on abandoned human colonies. Neither bothered to check what those human colonies had actually been doing. They would learn soon enough. 2 years had passed since the humans left, and Counselor Dong-Woo Kim's warnings were coming true. The former human representative had stayed behind as an independent observer, one of only a handful of humans still in council space. Every day brought news that made his heart heavy. The morning briefing painted a grim picture. 3 border disputes had erupted between Vraxian and Kasari territories in just the past month. What had once been peaceful boundaries, carefully negotiated by human diplomats over decades, now blazed with conflict. "The Vraxians have moved battle fleets to the Kepler sector," reported his aide, a young ethereal named Quinara. "The Kasari are responding with their own ships. Both sides claim the humans left unclear territorial agreements." Dong-Woo shook his head. He remembered those agreements well. They hadn't been unclear at all. Human negotiators had spent years creating detailed protocols for every possible dispute. But those protocols required both sides to actually talk to each other, something neither species wanted to do anymore. Without human mediators, old hatreds surfaced quickly. The Vraxians saw the Kasari as scheming cowards who hid behind their technology. The Kasari viewed the Vraxians as mindless brutes who solved problems with violence. Both were partly right, and both were completely wrong about how to work together. Admiral Subin Choi had predicted this exact scenario during the withdrawal hearings. Her small but efficient patrol fleets had maintained peace through constant movement, quick responses, and patient diplomacy. The admirals of other species had laughed at her tiny ships and soft methods. Now those same admirals were learning hard lessons. The massive Vraxian dreadnoughts were powerful enough to destroy entire fleets, but they moved too slowly to catch raiders and pirates. The sleek Kasari cruisers had advanced weapons and shields, but their crews were trained for conquest, not protection. Captain Jinwoo Lee watched the chaos unfold from his new home in the Outer Rim. His mixed-species crew gathered around the IE communication console, listening to distress calls flooding the emergency channels. Pirate attack in Sector 7, trade convoy under assault near Beta Station, refugee ship requesting escort through the danger zone. The calls came every few minutes now. Before the human exodus, such attacks happened maybe once a month. The human patrol network had been small but effective. with ships stationed at key points throughout the galaxy. More importantly, human crews knew how to work with local security forces, coordinate responses, and actually catch the fast-moving pirate vessels. "Should we respond?" asked Kex, Jinwoo's Mendi co-pilot. The furry alien's ears drooped with concern. "That refugee ship has families aboard." Jinwoo wanted to help, but his ship was already carrying supplies to struggling colonies. Like many former human naval officers, he now worked independently, trying to fill gaps that were growing larger every day. "Send them coordinates for Safe Harbor Station," he said finally. "It's the closest human settlement that can provide escort." But Safe Harbor was 3 days away, and the refugees needed help now. The economic problems were just as serious. Back on the former human trade station of New Geneva, manager Hyejin Kang received another cancellation notice. The Vraxian Freight company was pulling out of the Outer Rim routes, claiming they were unprofitable. What they really meant was complicated. Human traders had spent generations building relationships with dozens of small species and remote colonies. These routes required patience, flexibility, and understanding of local customs. A Vraxian captain might arrive at a Zephyrian trading post and demand immediate service, not understanding that Zephyrians needed 3 days of ritual preparation for major transactions. Human traders knew to arrive early, participate in the ceremonies, and build trust over time. The result was steady, reliable commerce that kept remote colonies supplied with necessities. Without human merchants, these routes were indeed unprofitable. But the colonies still needed supplies, and now they had nowhere to get them. The Kasari tried to fill the gap with automated trading systems. Their computer networks could calculate optimal routes and prices instantly. What they couldn't do was negotiate with a Catherian trade master who insisted on examining every item personally, or work with Mendi families who made business decisions, collectively over several days. Dr. Minho Choi documented these problems from his research station in neutral space. As a former council economist, he understood the complex web of relationships that kept galactic commerce flowing. "It's not just about moving goods," he explained to his research team. Human traders were cultural bridges. They learned languages, understood customs, built personal relationships. They made commerce possible between species that could barely talk to each other. The data supported his observations. Trade volume in human-vacated routes had dropped by 60%. Dozens of colonies were running short on essential supplies. Several species that depended on inter-system commerce were facing economic crisis. But the political leadership of the major powers remained focused on their territorial disputes. General Thexmore announced new military bases in former human space. Senator Vithek responded by claiming several abandoned human research stations for the Kasari Republic. Neither seemed to notice that the bases and stations they were fighting over had been quietly providing essential services to hundreds of worlds. The first real disaster struck when the agricultural world of Verdant Prime sent out a desperate distress call. Their crops were failing and they didn't know why. The planetary government requested immediate assistance from council agricultural experts. The response was swift and professional. Kasari scientists arrived within days, equipped with advanced analysis equipment and detailed biological databases. They quickly identified the problem, a soil bacteria that was killing the native crops. The solution should have been simple. The Kasari database contained treatments for thousands of similar problems. But none of their treatments worked on Verdant Prime. Dr. Tae-hyun Park, now working from a human agricultural station in independent space, received copies of the Kasari reports. He studied them with growing understanding. "They're trying to treat the symptoms, not the system," he explained to his colleague, Dr. Yoonji Park. Human agricultural advisors spent decades learning how Verdant Prime's ecosystem worked as a whole. The soil bacteria isn't the disease. It's a symptom of deeper imbalances. The humans had developed integrated solutions that worked with natural cycles, but those solutions required understanding local conditions, seasonal patterns, and the complex relationships between different species of plants and animals. The Kasari approach was to identify the problem and apply a technological fix. It was faster and seemed more scientific, But it ignored the wisdom that human advisors had built up through years of patient observation and cooperation with local farmers. By the end of the second year, the first colonies began to fail completely. Not from war or disaster, but from simple neglect. Systems that humans had quietly maintained for generations began to break down. Counselor Lumthara updated her mathematical models daily, tracking the cascading failures across the galaxy. Her predictions grew darker with each calculation. The removal of human stabilizing factors was creating chaos in ways that no one had anticipated. But when she presented her findings to the council, the response was the same as always. Ethereal. Mathematics cannot capture the real world, General Thexmore declared. Vraxian strength will restore order to the galaxy. Senator Vithek hissed agreement. Kasari efficiency will solve these temporary problems. The galaxy is better off without human weakness. Lumthara's energy form flickered with frustration. She could see the patterns clearly. The galaxy was unraveling without humanity's gentle but essential touch. But mathematics and logic meant nothing to beings who refused to listen. In the outer systems, human settlements continued to grow. Ships arrived daily carrying refugees from the chaos spreading through council space. Former enemies worked together in human communities, finding common ground that had seemed impossible under the old system. The humans had left quietly, without threats or demands. They were building something new in the darkness beyond the council's reach. But they were watching, and they were remembering everything. 5 years after humanity's departure, the galaxy was dying. Not from war, though there was plenty of that. Not from natural disasters, though those were increasing too. The galaxy was dying from 1,000 small failures that no one understood how to fix. Dr. Taehyun Park stood in his laboratory on New Terra, humanity's largest independent colony, reading the latest reports with growing alarm. The messages came from across the galaxy. Former colleagues, desperate government officials, even species that had mocked humanity's departure. The Zephyrian plague had started as a minor outbreak on a research station. These things happened, sometimes. The station's medical team should have contained it easily with standard quarantine protocols. Instead, it had spread to 6 worlds in 3 weeks and was showing no signs of stopping. The death rate is 30% and climbing, reported Dr. Yuri Song via encrypted transmission from inside the quarantine zone. She was one of the few humans who had remained in council space, working with an independent medical organization. The Kasari sent their best disease specialists. The Vraxians deployed their military medical corps. Neither group can slow it down. Taehyun studied the biological data that Yuri had smuggled to him. The plague organism was unusual but not unprecedented. Human databases contained information about 12 similar pathogens, and human medical protocols had successfully treated 9 of them. The problem wasn't that the plague was incurable. The problem was how the other species were trying to cure it. The Kasari approach was typically precise and technological. They had isolated the plague organism, analyzed its genetic structure, and developed targeted treatments to destroy it. Their medicines could kill the plague bacteria efficiently. Unfortunately, they also killed beneficial bacteria that the infected beings needed to survive. Patients recovered from the plague only to die from secondary infections. The Vraxian military. Doctors took a completely different approach. They focused on strengthening the patient's immune systems to fight off the disease naturally. Their treatments were crude, but effective for young, healthy Vraxian warriors. They were deadly for elderly, Zephyrians, young children, or anyone whose system was already weakened. Human medicine worked differently. Human doctors had learned to treat not just the disease but the whole patient. They considered age, species, medical history, emotional state, and dozens of other factors. They used combinations of treatments, some to fight the disease, some to support the patient's natural healing, some to prevent secondary problems. Most importantly, human doctors worked with healers from other species. Zephyrian meditation techniques helped patients' immune systems stay balanced. Mendi herbal knowledge provided gentle treatments for side effects. Ethereal energy manipulation could ease pain without drugs. The other species saw this as primitive and unscientific. They wanted single, pure solutions that could be applied universally. They didn't understand that effective medicine required understanding each patient as a unique individual. "Can we help them?" asked Dr. Yoonji Park, who had arrived to review the medical data. Tae-hyun shook his head sadly. "We've offered 3 times. The council rejected our assistance as unqualified because we don't operate under their medical authority anymore. They'd rather let people die than admit they need human expertise." The plague was just the most visible crisis. Across the galaxy, infrastructure that humans had quietly maintained for generations was beginning to fail. Engineer Hee-jin Kang received another desperate request for help, this one from a Vraxian mining colony. Their atmospheric processors were failing and none of their technical staff could fix them. "The irony is perfect," Hee-jin told her engineering team at their morning briefing. "Those processors are Kasari designed, Vraxian built, and human maintained. Each species contributed what they did best. But without human maintenance protocols, the systems are breaking down." The problem was cultural as much as technical. Kasari engineers designed elegant, efficient systems that worked perfectly under ideal conditions. Vraxian builders constructed them to last with redundant components and robust materials. But both species had rigid thinking that couldn't adapt when things went wrong. Human engineers thought differently. They were trained to expect problems, to work with imperfect conditions, to find creative solutions when standard procedures failed. They maintained detailed records of every unusual situation and developed procedures for handling combinations of failures that the original designers had never imagined. "The atmospheric processor manual has 300 pages, Yejin explained. "The Kasari wrote 50 pages about normal operations. The Vraxians added 50 pages about major repairs. Humans wrote the other 200 pages about everything that could go wrong and how to fix it." Without those human procedures, the mining colony was facing environmental collapse within weeks. Similar problems plagued systems throughout the galaxy. Water treatment plants designed for one species failed when asked to handle waste from multiple species living together. Power grids optimized for stable conditions couldn't cope with fluctuating demand patterns. Communication networks broke down when they tried to handle languages and protocols they weren't designed for. The humans had spent decades developing solutions to these integration problems. They had written the compatibility protocols, designed the adaptation interfaces, and trained the technicians who kept complex multi-species systems running smoothly. Captain Seok-jin Kim, now commanding a small fleet of human relief ships, watched the cascade of failures from his position on the edge of Council space. His ships carried desperately needed supplies to colonies that the major powers couldn't or wouldn't help. "New distress call from the Kepler Mining Consortium," reported his communications officer. "Their fusion plants are overheating. Standard Kasari safety protocols aren't working with their Vraxian-built containment systems." Seok-jin studied the technical data. He had the expertise to help. Human engineers had solved similar problems a dozen times over the years. His ships carried the right equipment and supplies, but the mining consortium was in Vraxian territory, and humans were no longer welcome there. "Send them our technical specifications," he decided. "Maybe their engineers can adapt our solutions to their systems." It was a long shot. The Vraxian engineers would have to swallow their pride and admit that humans had solutions they needed. Given their culture, they would probably try to solve the problem with bigger hammers and stronger materials instead. The political situation made everything worse. General Thexmore and Senator Vithek were now in open warfare over territorial disputes, but they still managed to agree on one thing: human help was not wanted. Human interference caused these problems, Thexmore declared in his latest speech to the Vraxian Assembly. "Their soft policies and mixed species nonsense weakened our systems. Pure Vraxian solutions will restore proper order." Vithek's response was equally predictable. "Kasari science will solve what Vraxian barbarism cannot. We do not need the primitive methods of departed humans." Meanwhile, the problems kept multiplying. Food distribution networks collapsed without human logistics coordination. Research projects stalled without human scientific collaboration. Refugee populations grew as smaller species fled the chaos in the major territories. Counselor Lumthara, worked frantically to document the cascading failures. Her mathematical model showed the patterns clearly. The galaxy civilizations were experiencing system-wide collapse. The humans were not just participants, she reported to the diminished Helmicor. They were the connective tissue that held our complex society together. Their removal has initiated a cascade failure that will destroy galactic civilization within a decade. Her warnings fell on deaf ears. The major species were too busy fighting each other to listen to mathematical abstractions from energy beings. But, in the outer darkness, humanity was thriving. Their independent colonies had become refuges for anyone seeking alternatives to the chaos consuming the galaxy. Former enemies worked side by side in human settlements, learning new ways to cooperate. Dr. So-Young Park watched the growth of New Terra from her office window. Ships arrived daily bringing refugees, supplies, and news from the failing galaxy they had left behind. "Any regrets?" asked her assistant. The same question from 5 years ago. So-Young looked at the thriving settlement around her. Humans, Catherians, Mendi, and dozens of other species worked together in the streets below. Children of different species played together in the parks. Scientists from various backgrounds collaborated on projects that would have been impossible under the rigid hierarchies of the council. "No," she said quietly. "We tried to save them. Now we're building something better. When they're ready to learn, they know where to find us." In the distance, another refugee ship appeared in the system. It carried survivors from another failed colony. Another group of beings seeking the peace and cooperation that only human communities seemed able to provide. The galaxy was learning, slowly and painfully, what it had lost. But the lesson was coming too late to save the civilization they had known. 8 years after humanity's quiet departure, the galaxy was on fire. Counselor Wanshik Nam sat in his small office on the observation level of the Galactic Council building, watching 3 separate battle fleets prepare for war in the space, around the capital world. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was the last human representative in council space, witness to the final collapse of everything his people had tried to build. The Great War between the Vraxian Empire and Kasari Republic had officially begun 3 months ago, but the fighting had been going on much longer. What started as border disputes had escalated into system-wide conflicts. Both sides claimed they were fighting for galactic security and order. "The morning casualty reports, sir," his aide Quinara said quietly. The young ethereal's energy form flickered with distress as she transmitted the data to his console. Wanshik read the numbers with growing horror. 40,000 dead in the Battle of Centaurus Gate. 200,000 refugees fleeing the destruction of Haven Colony. 12 systems under siege, their populations trapped between opposing fleets. But the war was only the most visible part of the crisis. The real disaster was happening quietly, in the places where normal life was supposed to continue. Captain Yuri Song's refugee convoy approached the neutral zone carrying the survivors of Harmony Station. The agricultural research facility had been humanity's greatest success story, a place where dozens of species worked together to develop crops that could feed the galaxy's growing population. "What happened there?" Wanshik asked during their encrypted communication. Yuri's face was grim on the screen. "Starvation. Not from war, but from incompetence. After the humans left, the Kasari took over agricultural management with their automated systems. Very efficient, very scientific. They increased crop yields by 30% in the first year. That sounds like success. It was, until the soil died. Human agricultural advisors had spent decades learning how to work with the natural cycles of each world. They knew when to rotate crops, when to let fields rest, how to maintain the bacterial balance that keeps soil healthy. The Kasari systems optimized for maximum production, but ignored long-term sustainability. The story was becoming familiar. Across the galaxy, short-term improvements had led to long-term disasters. The major species excelled at doing things, quickly and efficiently, but they had never learned the patient, careful approaches that humans had developed over generations of working with complex systems. On the inner worlds, Waste management systems were failing without human oversight. The Vraxians had assumed their military engineers could handle civilian infrastructure. They were wrong. Military systems were designed to work for short periods under emergency conditions, not to handle the daily needs of billions of beings, indefinitely. Cities that had been clean and healthy under human management were now plagued by contamination and disease. The Vraxian solution was to build bigger treatment plants with more powerful processing systems. But bigger and more powerful didn't help when the real problem was coordinating thousands of small decisions across complex urban environments. Dr. Minho Choi, monitoring the crisis from his research station in human space, documented the failures with scientific precision. His reports painted a picture of civilizational collapse that was both predictable and preventable. The pattern is consistent across all systems, he explained to a gathering of human leaders on New Terra. Complex processes that require constant adjustment and human judgment are failing. Automated systems that work perfectly under ideal conditions are catastrophically brittle when conditions change. The most shocking example was the failure of the Council's own analytical systems. The Ethereals had built sophisticated computer networks to process information and predict future trends. These systems had worked well as support tools for human decision-makers who could interpret the results and make judgment calls. Without human administrators, the systems produced increasingly absurd recommendations. The computers could process data perfectly, but they couldn't understand context, evaluate contradictory information, or adapt their models when conditions changed unexpectedly. The central planning computer recommended that we solve the refugee crisis by converting all refugees into energy and using them to power the fleet, Counselor Lumthara reported during one of her rare communications with human space. When we rejected this solution as impractical, it suggested we solve the energy crisis by converting the fleet into refugees. But the most desperate call for help came from an unexpected source. General Thexmore himself, leader of the proud Vraxian war machine, sent a secret message to Wanshik Nam. "We need human negotiators," the message said simply. "Not for surrender, for victory. We are winning every battle and losing the war." Wanshik understood the problem immediately. Vraxian military culture was built around honor, courage, and direct confrontation. These qualities made them excellent warriors, but terrible occupiers. Every world they conquered became a source of resistance and rebellion. Human military advisors had taught them how to win hearts and minds, how to turn former enemies into allies, how to build lasting peace instead of temporary victory. Without those skills, Vraxian success was destroying them. The Kasari faced similar problems from the opposite direction. Their advanced technology could solve almost any technical challenge, but they couldn't handle the human element of governance. Populations under Kasari rule were technically well managed but utterly miserable. "Efficiency is not enough," reported Dr. Yoon-Ji Park after interviewing refugees from Kasari territories. "They provide adequate food, shelter, and medical care. But they treat people like components in a machine. There's no consideration for cultural needs, emotional well-being, or individual differences. Rebellion is inevitable." The refugee crisis was overwhelming even human resources. Captain Seok Jin Kim commanded a growing fleet of rescue ships, but they could only save a fraction of those who needed help. "We have requests for evacuation from 47 worlds," he reported during a strategy meeting. "Our entire fleet could work for a year and not reach them all." But help was coming from unexpected sources. Species that had been neutral or even hostile to humans were beginning to change their positions. The wise Ethereals had been humanity's allies from the beginning, but now they were joined by the aquatic drift swimmers, the crystalline resonance choir, and even some rebel factions from Vraxian and Kasari territories. "They see what we see," explained Ambassador Jae-hoon Yoon, who had been conducting quiet diplomacy with various species. "The galaxy worked better with humans in it. Many beings want to help rebuild, but they need alternatives to the failing major powers." The biggest surprise came from the Outer Rim territories that had been abandoned during humanity's exodus. Instead of becoming lawless wastelands as predicted, many had developed into thriving communities. Without interference from the major powers, local species had learned to work together using methods they had learned from human examples. Self-governance is spreading, reported Captain Jinwoo Lee from his trading runs through the outer systems. Dozens of worlds have declared independence from both the Vraxian Empire and Kasari Republic. They're forming their own cooperative networks based on human organizational models. These independent systems were small and scattered, but they represented something new. Proof that the human way of building civilizations could work even without humans directly involved. The news reached the council chambers, just as the latest battle reports arrived. Senator Vithek had lost an entire fleet trying to recapture a rebellious Kasari colony. General Thexmore's forces were bogged down in guerrilla warfare on 6 different worlds. But the most shocking news came from Counselor Lumthara's latest mathematical analysis. She had finally calculated the true scope of humanity's contributions to galactic civilization. Before human departure, this council managed 1,247 major systems across 847 sectors, she announced to the diminished assembly. Human personnel were involved in managing, mediating, or supporting 1,092 of those systems. Their departure created cascading failures that have now affected 1,203 systems. The numbers were staggering. Humans had represented less than 8% of the galactic population, but they had been essential to over 87% of the systems that made civilization work. How is that possible? Demanded General Thexmore. Lumthara's energy form pulsed with the mathematical certainty of her answer. Humans were the only species that consistently worked to integrate different approaches and resolve conflicts between other species. They served as translators, mediators, coordinators, and problem solvers in situations where other species could not cooperate directly. The truth was finally becoming clear. Humanity hadn't been just another member of galactic civilization. They had been the force that made galactic civilization possible. But the realization was coming too late. The galaxy was burning, and the humans were far away, building something new in the darkness beyond the reach of the dying council. Wanshik Nam prepared his final report as chaos erupted in the streets below the council building. His last duty, as humanity's representative, would be to document the fall of everything they had tried to save. 10 years after humanity's quiet exodus, Ambassador Jae-hoon Yoon stood on the observation deck of New Terra's orbital station, watching the most unlikely fleet in galactic history approach his home system. The lead ship flew council colors, but behind it came vessels from across the galaxy. Vraxian battlecruisers traveled alongside Kasari science vessels. Ethereal energy constructs moved in formation with ships from a dozen smaller species. Most shocking of all, many of the vessels carried mixed crews, former enemies working together out of desperation. The formal request arrived this morning, reported Dr. So-Young Park, who now served as New Terra's Minister of External Affairs. Full restoration of human membership in the Galactic Council. Senior positions guaranteed. Territorial autonomy recognized. They're offering us everything we wanted 10 years ago. Jae-hoon nodded slowly. He had expected this day would come, but he had hoped the galaxy wouldn't have to burn before it arrived. The delegation's leader was Counselor Lumthara, the ethereal mathematician who had tried to warn the council about humanity's importance. With her came General Thexmore, humbled by defeats he couldn't understand, and Senator Vithek, his pride shattered by rebellions his technology couldn't control. But the most surprising member of the delegation was Wanshik Nam, the last human representative who had stayed behind to witness the council's collapse. His reports had become legendary in human space. Careful documentation of every failure, every missed opportunity, every moment when different choices might have saved galactic civilization. The formal negotiation took place in New Terra's government complex, a building designed to accommodate dozens of different species comfortably. The contrast with the old council chambers was stark. Where the council had emphasized hierarchy and dominance, the human building promoted equality and cooperation. "We come to ask humanity to return," Lumthara began, her mathematical precision making the words seem like a formula. "Our analysis shows that galactic civilization cannot survive without human participation." General Thexmore, His once proud armor, now bearing the scars of countless defeats, spoke with unprecedented humility. Vraxian strength is not enough. We can conquer worlds, but cannot govern them. We can win battles, but cannot create peace. We need human wisdom to turn victory into lasting success. Senator Vithek's admission was even more painful. Kasari efficiency has failed. Our perfect systems work only under perfect conditions. When conditions change, our responses are inadequate. Human adaptability is required for stable governance. Jae-hoon listened politely, but his mind was elsewhere. Through the building's transparent walls, he could see the thriving community that humanity had built in exile. Humans worked alongside refugees from across the galaxy, all contributing their unique strengths to something greater than any single species could achieve alone. Your offers are generous, he said finally, but you are asking us to return to a system that failed. We have built something different here. Dr. Yoonji Park, who had become New Terra's chief administrator, gestured to the displays showing human, colonial growth. In 10 years, we have established 127 independent settlements across 34 systems. Our population has grown by 300%, but more importantly, our communities have become home to over 200 different species. The delegation studied the data with growing amazement. Human space wasn't just surviving, it was thriving beyond anything the old council had achieved. Captain Seok-jin Kim, now commanding the Human Colonial Defense Force, provided the military perspective. Our defense networks protect not just human worlds, but any community that requests our assistance. We have prevented 47 conflicts through negotiation and stopped 12 others through minimal force intervention. The contrast was obvious to everyone in the room. While the old galaxy burned in endless warfare, human space had become a haven of peace and cooperation. How? Asked General Thexmore. How do you maintain order without conquest? How do you resolve disputes without superior force? Captain Yuri Song, who had spent years evacuating refugees from the chaos in council space, answered from her experience. We start with the assumption that everyone wants to live peacefully and build good lives for their families. When conflicts arise, we look for solutions that give everyone what they need, not just what they want. But that is impossible, protested Senator Vithek. Resources are limited. Territory is finite. Someone must win and someone must lose. Dr. Min-ho Choi, whose economic models had predicted the council's collapse with mathematical precision, smiled at the Kasari senator's certainty. That assumption is why your system failed. When you assume someone must lose, you create enemies who will fight forever. When you look for solutions where everyone can win, you create allies who will work together. The delegation spent 3 days touring human settlements and meeting with the diverse communities that had flourished under human administration. They saw Vraxian refugees working peacefully alongside former Kasari slaves. They witnessed technological innovations that combined the best ideas from dozens of species. They observed children of different races playing together, learning from each other, growing up without the prejudices that had divided their parents. Most importantly, they experienced decision-making processes that included everyone's voices, while still reaching effective conclusions. Human administrators had developed methods for managing complex, multi-species communities that were both efficient and fair. On the final day of negotiations, Jae-hoon delivered humanity's response. To the Council's request, we thank you for recognizing our contributions and offering us partnership, he began. But we must decline your invitation to return to the old system. The delegation's shock was visible across species lines. They had expected humanity to demand better terms, not to refuse entirely. However, Jae-hoon continued, we extend our own invitation. The human colonies welcome any individuals, communities, or entire species who wish to join our confederation. Dr. So-young Park explained the offer in detail. We are not building an empire or seeking to rule anyone. We are creating a voluntary association of communities that choose to work together. Every member has equal voice in decisions that affect them. Every culture is respected and protected. Every individual is valued for their unique contributions. HFY terms were unprecedented in galactic history. No species had ever offered full partnership with complete equality to their former rulers. "What about the territories we control?" asked General Thexmore. "What about our existing obligations?" "Bring your people and leave the territories," suggested Captain Seok Jin Kim. "Let the local populations govern themselves. Provide them with the tools and knowledge they need, then step back and let them build their own futures." It was a radical concept. The major powers had always assumed that advanced species needed to guide and control less developed ones. The human approach suggested that all species were capable of self-governance when given the opportunity and support. Senator Vithek struggled with the implications. But without central control, without unified standards, how do you maintain stability? "The same way a healthy ecosystem maintains stability," explained Dr. Tae-hyun Park, whose agricultural expertise had become legendary among the refugee communities. "Diversity creates resilience. Different approaches to the same problems provide backup solutions when one method fails. Cooperation creates stronger results than control." The negotiations continued for weeks as the delegation reported back to their respective governments. The responses revealed how desperately the galaxy needed change. The Vraxian Assembly, facing rebellions on dozens of worlds, voted to begin gradual withdrawal from their conquered territories. Vraxian colonies would be offered the choice of independence or membership in the Human Confederation. The Kasari Republic, bankrupt from the cost of their failing automation systems, agreed to share their technology freely in exchange for human administrative expertise. Most surprisingly, dozens of smaller species that had been neutral in the Great War announced their intention to join the Human Confederation immediately. But the greatest victory came from an unexpected source. The rebel movements in both Vraxian and Kasari territories, inspired by human examples, began forming their own cooperative governments. They didn't need human administration. They had learned human principles and were applying them in their own ways. 6 months after the delegation's arrival, Ambassador Jae-hoon-yoon stood once again on New Terra's observation deck. But this time he was watching construction ships building the framework for a new kind of galactic government. The Human Confederation had grown to include over 400 worlds and 180 different species. More importantly, it had inspired similar cooperative movements across the galaxy. The old council was dissolving, but something better was taking its place. Not one government ruling everyone, but many communities choosing to work together. "Any regrets?" asked Dr. So-young Park, the same question that had been asked so many times over the years. Jae-hoon looked out at the diverse fleet of ships from dozens of species, all working together to build a better future. In the distance, another group of refugee vessels approached, carrying beings who had chosen cooperation over domination, community over empire.